We're going to go through a lot of things, primarily in 3 different buckets. We're going to look back on the last 45 days, as Jasper said. We're going to then try and sort of look at, the next probably 4-year cycle of the new media rights agreement between the ICC and Disney Star Sports. But in between, we'll be taking care of a whole bunch of other stuff: technology, language, fans, marketing, data from the publisher side, but also looking at the associate countries and the full members and how do you actually grow the game. This probably was, to my mind, the widest watched World Cup in the history of the game, most attended, on air, online, on social as well, including commentary in Dutch on the national broadcaster in Holland, thanks to Sunil in the audience. If I can invite my guests at this stage to come and join me on stage, I'd appreciate it. Can I ask you please give a hand of applause? Marlo's going, you can just turn around. Gentlemen, good morning.
Good morning.
How are you?
Very well. Good to be here.
Likewise, Sanjog. Welcome.
Thank you.
We've shared the stage before. Geoff, I'm a debutant with you, but I assure you we'll build the partnership one run at a time. I'll farm the strike so you can actually have most of the batting. That's the rules of the game here. I want to sort of kick off, as I was sharing with the audience, the last 45 days. It's definitely been probably the biggest World Cup from different dimensions. I'm sure there's going to be concurrence from different points of view. What are the reflections or realizations that you find yourself encountering?
Well, I think one of the things I always try to do with these events is wait until close to the end or the end and to look at the event as a whole. And I think where we are today, I think we're really happy with the way the event has gone. I think you look at your key metrics would be your viewership. We've broken concurrent streaming records, and I'm sure Sanjog can talk a bit more about that. The attendance has exceeded 1 million for the tournament, which we're really pleased with. I think it'd be fair to say we had a slow start, but over the last few weeks in the tournament, the attendances, not just for the Indian games but for the non-Indian games, have been really pleasing. There's been terrific support for all the teams playing in the tournament. Our digital viewership numbers have gone through the roof. I think we're up 400% compared to 2019 World Cup, and we're already 50% up on what our targets were for this event. And I also look at the cricket side, and we've had a 10-team event where every team has won at least 2 games, and I think the 2 teams that Netherlands finished in last place, and yet they've won 2 matches after having worked their way through an extensive qualifying process to get to the tournament. And they've acquitted themselves really well. We've also had Afghanistan performing really well and taking more steps forward in their performances. So from a cricketing side of things, it's been really intriguing. And we're in the best week of the tournament or of the 4-year cycle when it comes down to semi-finals of World Cups. And we've got a rematch of India versus New Zealand. We were just reminiscing outside the 2-day one-dayer from Manchester in 2019, but the 2 semi-finals are great matchups, and really looking forward to the cricket and then the final on Sunday.
So clearly a good day at the office. Sanjog, this is, to my understanding, your 3rd 50-over World Cup. 15, 19, 23. I'm sure you've done a whole bunch before that, but if you keep with the format, please help me out. Just bear with me.
I don't think I want to get into that. How old I've been.
No, you were on the young graduates. You were the young graduate scheme at Star, right? Where they pick up teenagers, and then by the time they're in mid-30s, they're sort of yeah. So, what's your report card? What's your sense? What's your sense in the team? What's your sense with the commercial partners, management, and of course, the partners of the ICC?
Look, the reason why all of us love the World Cup is because it genuinely brings the world together. That's what the World Cup is supposed to be. Millions of people all feeling the very same thing at the very same time. And that's the power of live sport, something that nothing else in the world can potentially offer. The World Cup in India has been as much of a spectacle as we expected it to be. We are nearing 450 million viewers on TV. Now, just to set that context and let the numbers sink in, 450 million viewers across the first 34 matches of the World Cup. That's more viewers than the number of viewers who watch the top 3 entertainment and movie channels in a month. That's how big the World Cup has been. And that's the scale of viewing that we have seen. If we look at what's been happening with digital consumption, we've been hitting record numbers almost with a certain regularity. We're up to 44 million peak concurrency on digital. The peak concurrency on linear or TV has been 80 million. So again, viewership figures as the primary business metric that we chase and a metric that ICC and Disney Star chase to really be an indicator of the health of the event seems to suggest that there is nothing bigger than this, and it is only growing bigger. The other thing that it has done, interestingly, and there are a lot of commercial partners here, is that it has genuinely generated buoyancy in the ad market, which was missing for the last year. So festive spending, as far as advertising is concerned, is up 40%. We've seen higher volumes of ads and price realization than the previous World Cup. We are seeing almost 45 to 50 categories advertise on the World Cup for the first time. So new advertisers are coming in who have either brand objectives or have consumer acquisition objectives who are partnering with the World Cup to really push forth their agenda. And I think the final business metric, which again is an indicator of the health of the sport, is the engagement. There has been a 20% growth in the total time spent by an average viewer watching the tournament for the first 34 matches compared to 2019. So on all parameters of fandom, and these are measurable parameters of fandom, the World Cup seems to have lived up to its billing of being the biggest spectacle that cricket has to offer.
So you're summarizing to say addressable universe has grown. The breadth of different segments within that universe is growing, new audiences coming in, and the depth of time spent and engagement is growing. So it's a pretty sophisticated sort of way of, I guess, looking at this. I'm just curious, how would this compare with 19, if that's a fair comparison? And when you were planning this, say, 12, 18 months ago, where was the bar, and then where has it been exceeded and why?
I think there are two things that we always look for when we plan sporting events of this scale. One is growth, and the other is new viewers. And that's always been the conversation with Geoff and his team at the ICC and with the BCCI as primary stakeholders in this World Cup, to really see how we can grow what is already quite a spectacle. So if I was to look back at 2019 and compare some of the comparable metrics, now do remember that that event was in England, the structure of the tournament, not the format was the same, but the scheduling, etc., plays a part. But total watch time, which is perhaps the best indicator of how well the World Cup is doing, is up 10 to 11% compared to 2019, which basically means the volume of viewers and their intensity of engagement both seems to be on an upward trend. Now, you asked me what the ambition was. The ambition was, as I stated earlier, to make this the biggest cricket event that this part of the world has certainly seen, but I think also as ICC's global partners, make it the biggest World Cup that the world has seen, and also a World Cup that brings in new audiences, activates new markets. You mentioned the commentary in Dutch in Netherlands, and I think the story unfolding around Netherlands and Afghanistan gives us a sense of where cricket can go in terms of new markets and new teams coming through and making a big dent in the cricket ecosystem. So in a nutshell, the ambition was to make it the biggest tournament ever across multiple parameters, which include new markets, new audiences, and new experiences that we want to offer.
I'll pick up your point about the Dutch team, Holland, Netherlands, and Afghanistan. Give us some context, Geoff, in terms of, because prior to assuming the CEO's office, you very much were GM of cricket, very much involved in the growth, administration, execution of the game. Talk us through sort of, as you were swapping hats, what's the sort of fly-on-the-wall view of what the conversations are, what the initiatives which emerge from those conversations in Dubai with the member countries, with the staff around the world, to make sure talent pathways get unblocked and accelerated?
I think it's something that's happened over the last probably 8 years that I think has been really positive for cricket and global cricket. I remember the 2015 Cricket World Cup, Men's Cricket World Cup in Australia and New Zealand, and the 10 full member countries at that stage qualified automatically, and it didn't matter whether they were good, no good, they qualified, and it was a fight amongst the associate members as to who got the remaining 4 spots, and since then, leading into 2019 and 2023, we've made the qualification for the Men's Cricket World Cup a fully meritocratic process. So, acknowledging that teams have got busy calendars and can't play qualification tournaments on a regular basis, but between a combination of rankings and pathway tournaments, we've introduced jeopardy from team number 32 through to team number 1, and everyone earns their right to play in a World Cup. And if you look at the pathway the Netherlands have been through, they won the World Cricket League, I think it was back in 2017 or 2018. They earned a spot in the newly created Cricket World Cup Super League, which was a 13-team ODI competition. The top 8 teams qualified automatically, and I remember South Africa having to beat England in some matches in South Africa earlier this year to get the 8th spot, and here they are finishing second in the tournament and getting into the semi-finals. And the Netherlands, with that regular exposure to higher level competition, they went to a very difficult qualifying tournament in Zimbabwe and prevailed in an epic run chase against Scotland, and Sri Lanka and Netherlands came through that tournament to get to India. And then they acquit themselves well in India. So, their performances on the field show that they've fully deserved their place in this tournament, and their performances at the tournament shows that they've got potential to improve even further. And that's the bit that's so important for the game, because if you go back to the 2015 example, you have 10 full member countries qualifying automatically, and some of those countries haven't participated in this event because your form as a cricket team goes up and it goes down, and what you want to do is keep incentivising countries to get better. And if there is an opportunity for someone to jump up the ladder in terms of where they stand in world cricket, then that has to be accessible to them. So to be able to say to all of our member countries, here's your pathway to qualify for the Men's Cricket World Cup, or here's your pathway to qualify for the T20 World Cups, and you can earn a spot in those tournaments if you perform well enough, it drives the whole pathway and the competition structure for international cricket.
I guess the summary, is there's a competitive pressure in an 8, 10, 12-team tournament where your spot, the guarantee of your spot cannot be assumed. And that creates a very different jeopardy altogether.
Yes, as my English friends have been sort of telling me over the last couple of weeks, complaining about the qualification process for the Champions Trophy in 2025, that having to perform on the field is how you get your position at these events. And so they performed well at the end and qualified for the next tournament. But the idea that every match matters. The last week, I think it was in Kathmandu, there was a qualifier where Nepal played the UAE for a spot, and it was pretty much for a place in the tournament in the West Indies and USA next June. And that, their fortunes came down to that one match, and now Nepal's going to USA, which will be great for our digital viewership numbers, and UAE has to regroup and try and qualify for the next tournament. So I think that's the cutthroat world that so many of our associate countries live in, and now that extends all the way through the pathway for men's and women's senior cricket.
It's funny, I've now spent over a dozen years in an associate country, in Singapore. And in that time period, the way folks actually look at where how to watch on television. In July, and inevitably you get asked about where to watch it on the various WhatsApp groups. In July, there were a dozen people within a week who asked me, where can I watch the World Cup qualifiers? It almost shows, like the World Test Championship, that the qualifiers themselves are now emerging as an event and a format in its own right because it's got some relevance and some meaning. Sanjog, Geoff talked about the Netherlands. Afghanistan has been quite a phenomenal story. To my understanding, didn't win a single game in 19, and this year they were within a potential catch of making the semis. What's it been like for you as a storyteller, as a publisher, and somebody who's been promoting the sport?
It's the story of the World Cup, to my mind. Other than India's dominant performance so far and how well the Indian bowlers have bowled and all the other narratives associated with the Indian team, the Afghan story is really the story of the World Cup in every way. I was at the England-Afghanistan game in Delhi, and the outpouring of support for the Afghanistan team was phenomenal. I think the stadium was almost 70-75% full. Yes, there were a lot of Afghan fans, but there were a lot of local fans who were supporting every move that Afghanistan was making. And as they went from strength to strength, this country discovered a new underdog who had a shot at upsetting the apple cart, which is exactly the jeopardy you want in a tournament of this scale. You don't want, and perhaps that is the one critique of this World Cup that anyone objectively looking at the tournament may have, that other than Afghanistan and the emergence of Afghanistan, and on the flip side, the lack of performance from tournament favorites England, the competitiveness in the event has been limited. We haven't had as many close games as we did. Even the upsets have been one-sided. The Maxwell innings aside, and eventually that seemed like a one-sided game as well because he practically finished it early. But I think there is, if I was to pull back and objectively look at hits and misses of the World Cup, I think one thing that stands out is what Afghanistan brought to the table in terms of being able to compete with the top teams, and the story of almost making it to the semi-final. But one thing that was a miss, perhaps, was the wide chasm in terms of standard of play between the top three teams, perhaps. And Australia, after the first week, seemed to have settled in quite well. And the rest of the pack. And I think that, to my mind, is something that the cricket ecosystem at large, and of course, Geoff and the ICC team in particular, need to be looking at to see how many teams can compete on an even keel in a tournament like this to give fans the tournament they genuinely deserve.
It's an interesting point you raise, and I wonder whether it's a two-sided, two sides of the same coin. And the other side is that the 50-over game, I think we spoke about this yesterday briefly, that it's almost like a second innings for the 50-over format, in the sense that the skills required are becoming very distinctive to the format. And there is potentially an argument that the one-sidedness of even upsets had a cadence of about 20-25 overs, and the batting-bowling style was similar to the 20 overs. And the other side couldn't compete with the remaining 20, and therefore even the upsets became one-sided. That's just my sort of layman's view. What's your take? Do you see that this is almost like a re-emergence and a redefinition of the 50-over format from a skills, stamina perspective?
Well, I think 50-over cricket's always had a different place to the other two formats in that, you have got the slogan is that it takes one day, but it is a full day of cricket. And even one of the reasons we keep the men's under-19 World Cup at 50 overs is because it fully tests players. It gives batters a chance to make 200 in the case of Glenn Maxwell, or big centuries batting for a long period of time. bowlers get a chance to work out batters and execute plans and bounce back from a bad over here or there, which they, the skills to do that across a 10-over spell as opposed to a 4-over spell are different. So seeing how players manage that, and I think the other issue in this tournament in particular has been fitness and conditioning, because some of the conditions have been quite sapping, and some of the teams fielding in the afternoon have found it a little bit more difficult. So it tests different aspects of the game to the a T20 game or even a Test match. So, but it generally reflects the best team going around at that time, and I think I've been very impressed with India's dominance across this tournament and the way that they've adapted to 50-over cricket, because that group of players playing together probably hasn't played a lot over the last 12 months or so, but the way they've come together preparing for this tournament and the way they've executed during this tournament has been exceptional and really driven huge interest in the event. So I think the 50-over format is also linked with the Cricket World Cup, and I think Sanjog made a good point earlier. It's been an entry point for people to engage with the game, and it's got almost 50 years of history behind it as well. And those of you who were here last night, Sir Vivian Richards here telling stories about and he was when he was in his prime in 1975 and 1979, it was the inception of the Cricket World Cup, and the people who fall in love with the game remember those, and they attach success with the Cricket World Cup, and I think players do as well. I think if there's one tournament a player wants to win, it's the 50-over World Cup. So that helps drive interest in this event. The format itself, when packaged with this event, is very strong. I think there's been question marks around in between tournaments what happens, and I think that's a discussion for another day. But reflecting on the format in this tournament, it really does accentuate good cricket and expose players who might be falling short. So it's done a very good job in that form, in that sense.
It's good.
Just to
Go ahead.
add to what Geoff just said, I think it's also important for us to be able to distinguish between what works for this spectacle of an event and what works or doesn't work for the format. And at times, the two tend to get merged into each other. And this event will recruit more fans who have not watched a single minute of cricket over the last 6 to 9 months than any other event will. That's not because of the format, that's because of the spectacle and what they're playing for. And we must be cognizant of the inferences we make from the data which points to a certain success to be able to delineate what's really behind that success. Is it the context? Is it the competition and the tournament format in this case? Is it the competitiveness of games, which I said perhaps the World Cup didn't score as well on as we will have liked, and I'm sure as Geoff will agree, will have liked as well. Culture. Is it enough of a epochal cultural moment? Because that's what these spectacles are. They define culture in many ways, and definitely sports culture as fans see them. And to some extent, the contouring of the tournament. At times, we tend to ignore the fantastic work that the ICC and BCCI do in scheduling games in a way which also maximizes fandom. And while it seems like it may be just logistics or hygiene, it actually plays a huge part in making the tournament successful. And I'm sure Geoff will agree, we've spent a lot of time discussing what the ideal schedule looks like for viewership to be maximized. And thus, it's important for us not to take the success of the World Cup to be an indicator of how successful the format is.
That's a fascinating point.
Can I
Go
just
ahead,
say one
Geoff.
thing? Yeah, the other element in this is the last 3 World Cups, 50-over World Cups, have been won by the host country. And And I think that really does drive the engagement of the local fans, particularly viewers, with the tournament. 2011 here in India, 2015 in Australia, 2019 in England. Who knows whether that sequence will continue on Sunday, but it is, I think that adds to the momentum behind the tournament. I've been involved in tournaments where the host hasn't done so well, and they don't have the same feel about them. And I don't know whether Sanjog would like to expand, but whether India's dominant performances and super impressive performances has contributed to the results they've seen, or how much it's added to the metrics around the success of the tournament.
Absolutely, and we've discussed this. I think the momentum that got built in the first 10 or 12 days of India's performance really set the tone, along with those two upsets that happened in the same week. I think the inflection point for the interest in the World Cup to go from being theoretical to genuine fandom happened in that 1 week where it was reinstated that the Indian team was looking as strong as it has since then, and Netherlands beating South Africa and Afghanistan beating England within a couple of days of each other. And that, I think that was week 2 perhaps, is what really set alight the World Cup. Again, I think the tournament, the format, the way we didn't know who the semi-finalists were going to be till the last week, all played a part in making the World Cup as successful as it has been.
Which lends me to the other conversation we were having yesterday. So a lot of the value in the last decade has been driven by India playing in India, more often than not, or in the UK, time zones work. But you mentioned about how even non-India games were adding to dwell time, engagement time, and viewership. Could you sort of double-click on that and try and sort of give us a sense of why that was the case, what was different, and why that happened? Because it seemed to be quite material.
I think one thing that has really helped the performance of non-India games in a World Cup, purely from a viewership point of view, is the familiarity with players who are playing for those teams. And a large part of that credit must go to IPL. A lot of these heroes come and play every year and build familiarity. So when a Glenn Maxwell practically does the impossible, viewers are already aware of what he can potentially do. And thus, they stay on to see if this match can have a different ending from the one that our winning predictor is throwing up as 3% or something like that. And they stay back and they actually watch that innings unfold. So I think a part of that credit must go to IPL for familiarizing Indian audiences with many more stars beyond the Indian team and the key heroes that we are familiar with. I think the other part of it, and I touched upon it briefly, has to do with, and you mentioned it as well, a combination of the pathway events as well as the way that the tournament has been scheduled, which allows audiences to engage with non-India matches almost with a certain frequency that would not happen if the tournament was not scheduled the way that it is. So it's a combination of how familiar we are with at least 3 or 4 key heroes in each team, the prominence of the pathway events and the fact that heroes are coming through, new heroes are coming through, and the way that the tournament has been scheduled, which allows us to weave a narrative which takes you from game to game. If most of you have watched the coverage, you'll notice that there is a lot of promotion of non-India matches that actually happens on India matches. And the reason we do that is because you have large aggregation of audiences happening on the India games, and you're trying to redirect them to a non-India game of significance. And that's enabled by the ICC and the way they schedule games, and really powered by the way we build the narrative through the course of the tournament.
It's fascinating, if you'll indulge me. So we have a 13-year-old teenager as a sample size of 1 in Singapore. And this is, again, the associate country Indian diaspora demand. To your point, anytime Warner gets runs, Shreyas Iyer got 100, Rabada bowls well. She's a Delhi Capitals fan. Her association with the team and with that particular match is through the IPL player franchise, even if the player is no longer with the franchise. And that's a very interesting way of how the cross-promotion, especially in a market like India, actually works. I'm conscious of time. We've got another 15 minutes. So, and if you have any questions from the audience, just please raise your hand and hopefully we'll send a mic across to you and we can have your comments. One straight away? Somebody? Anybody? Okay. Yes. Do we have any mics, or if it's large enough and you can... Just a gentleman in the front, please, yeah? Is there a mic coming? Thank you. No. Mic pehle wahan pahunch gaya tha. I'll come back to you. Gentleman at the back on the left, please.
Yeah. So thank you for sharing the insights. And so one
Can you
thing,
speak a bit louder, please?
Yeah, sure. Why not? So basically, a lot has been done when it comes to fan engagement on the broadcast, right? The broadcasters have invested. Everything which has been done is for the big screen at the audience who are watching it at the home. What are the kind of initiatives which, let's say, the ICC is doing, or let's say the broadcaster is trying to do, which will enhance the in-stadia experience of the fans? Because I have heard, it's been surface level, that let's say we can create a metaverse, but yes, we can create, but what will you do? How is it going to enhance the experience of the person who is like seeing like this when the ball is hit and then trying to find it out, because it's very hard to spot the cricket ball. So if you can share some insights around that.
Like, I'll just replay your question for the clarity of you're fundamentally saying across the 4 dimensions, on air, on digital, on social, on ground, you're saying the 4th piece, the on ground, what might be the ways of optimizing. Is that your question? Thank you.
So before I let Geoff answer that question, I think one thing that the gentleman mentioned was that there was a lot being done for the big screen. Now, the one thing that I want to highlight, and the ICC's played a big part in driving this, is this World Cup was the first time that an experience was custom designed for the screen that you have in your hand, which is the vertical feed or max view. And it seems something simple, where you don't have to tilt the screen to watch the game, but it's highly intuitive. It was designed with a view to create an experience for a fan whose first port of call to engage with the game happens to be a 6-inch screen and not a 32, 36, 42-inch screen that perhaps most of us still watch the game on. It was to enable a continuity of experience and enable accessibility, which makes engaging with the game that much more convenient. And the interesting thing about it is, I think when the ICC started work with Disney Star to develop this service, we didn't expect it to be as successful as it has turned out to be. If you are on the move, I would urge all of you to try Max View on Disney Plus Hotstar. It's actually a much more intuitive mobile experience than something that you will have watched as a version of the big screen experience being offered to you on a 6-inch screen, which is how every broadcast till this World Cup has been. This is the first time that there is a native experience being designed for a 6-inch screen, leveraging all the features of accessibility and mobility that an interactive 6-inch screen offers to really drive deeper the engagement of consumers on the 6-inch screen. So to add to what the gentleman was saying, it's not just the in-home big screen experience which is being constantly enhanced, it is also the small screen on the move experience which has reached a new high with this World Cup. And full credit to the ICC team along with the Disney Star team for actually powering it and making it happen for the World Cup.
It's fascinating in terms of, at least from little that I know, it's almost the culmination of efforts dating back 12, 18 months. There's almost sort of trials being done at the ICC's investment in Australia for the T20, and then it comes. But I think the larger point you're raising to the gentleman's question is that there is no discrete spaces any longer. If I'm on air watching on a large screen at home, I'm still on this. If I'm in the stadium, I'm still on this. We'll talk later in the day with Meta and the creation that Parthasarathi team has done. So there are 4 different dimensions which are overlapping. And I guess that's a very different kind of a fan experience, Geoff, don't you think?
Yeah, that's right. And I was going to refer to the vertical production as well. I think the other thing that you know, World Cups are always good as milestones in cricket's evolution, and I think the other one, probably, you know, for you to expand on, Sanjog, is your language coverage over, you know, and how it has developed over the years, and in terms of making viewership and consumption of our events a lot more accessible to more people. Do you want to just talk about what you've done in this tournament?
Yeah, I think it stems from what Unmish said and you just referred to. We're trying to constantly push the envelope on creating the most ubiquitous sporting experience possible, which is agnostic of screens, which is agnostic of where you are, which is agnostic of which screen you have access to. So in terms of accessibility, in terms of the features of the screen that you have available, and who you are as a consumer, we're trying to provide the most all-encompassing experience. And a big part of that, as Geoff said, is coverage in local languages, not just coverage which is dubbed, mind you. This is coverage which is truly fashioned for a consumer from that region. And in the case of the World Cup, there are 11 parallel, fully customized experiences which are being offered across the two screens, including languages such as Telugu, Tamil, Kannada, Malayalam, Bangla, Marathi. And with a strong focus on not just the language, but also cultural nuances, what fandom for that sport in that region is like, and the narratives which are most relevant. So for example, a viewer in TN, when he or she is watching the Tamil feed, may be watching a deep analysis of Ravindra Jadeja's variations of speed, while as the viewer in Karnataka, at the same time when he or she is watching the live feed in Kannada, may be watching a great analysis of the swing that Siraj is getting, largely because the affinity for Ravindra Jadeja may be higher in TN because of his CSK linkage, and the affinity for Mohammad Siraj may be higher due to his RCB linkage in Karnataka. So that's the extent of customization that is now happening across the parallel experiences that are being offered. It's not just limited to the language, it's actually about how sport and sports fandom in that region reacts to a particular moment, or wants to hear about a certain player, or engages with a certain narrative.
Thank you, Sanjog. And I'll come to you. Thanks for your patience. There are a few bowling changes along the way, but go ahead.
Hello. Yeah. Anil Vanwari from IndianTelevision.com. The question is there's a lot of innovation in digital happening, and cameras are being used for television. Where does the ICC and Star Sports see the future? Is it going to be more on television and experiences on television, or is it going to be on digital? You've got the max view on digital, but where do you see television headed? Because television is still generating large viewership in India and globally in terms of. So where do you see the focus being more on television or digital?
If I may, in the conscious of time, because I was going to go to the crystal ball section, and this is not a planted question, so thank you. But let me just take a step back, and if I give you a timeline.
Let me just answer that in 30 seconds.
Go ahead.
I think ICC and Disney Star don't see this as a television or digital conversation. We genuinely see this as a conversation about fans who should have the best experience available to them on the screen that they most want to engage with. I think at times it's a reductive conversation when you start comparing TV and digital and you start talking about future of TV and future of digital. We are a fan-first organization, and I think that's what the ICC is as well. And that automatically means that our approach has to be agnostic of the screen that you may choose to engage with the content on. It's to potentially offer you the best experience possible if you're watching it on the 42-inch screen, and the best experience possible if you're in your car driving home, trying to follow the game on a 6-inch screen. And that's the approach. The approach is, how do you constantly elevate the standard of experience across those two screens? How do you create this ubiquitous aggregative experience where the ambition being everyone who's interested in cricket all at one time is logging into that one emotion of that one moment, irrespective of which screen he or she may be on.
Thank you.
Get a comment on that?
No, I think that summarised the approach well, which is trying to make the game as accessible to people as possible, whether that's the device they're watching on, or whether it's the language they're consuming it in, or the style they're consuming it in. And I think for us, every event is a small iteration in that journey, and I think that we've covered a lot of the things that stand out in this tournament, but our team is looking at ways in which we can engage more around the delivery of events, but in terms of being able to connect to younger audiences outside the events or around the sides of events, that's an ongoing work of progress in gaming and other things as well.
Talking about ongoing progress, I'm conscious of time, the last 4 or 5 minutes, but if we just do a North Star, 2027, next 50 over World Cup in South Africa, beginning of a new rights cycle, you've got under-19 tournaments for men and women, you've got one event every year in the men's and the women's as well, World Test Championship and the qualifiers as well. What's the lens through which you would probably look at the next 4 to 5 years? I'll probably start off with you, Geoff, in terms of where to take the game. It's got 14 teams rather than 10 in 2027 as well. What are the sort of 2 or 3 priorities or areas of focus that you might have?
I think it's an expansion of what I touched on earlier, which is providing incentive for all of our member countries to be able to compete on the biggest stage. And I think one of the strongest pieces of feedback we get from our members, particularly the ones who aren't in the 10 that are here, is how important for them the stage of a World Cup is. And we've consciously taken the decision to expand our T20 World Cup to men's for 20 teams and women's is going to 12 teams. And in terms of the teams making those, making those tournaments, the one next year, I think we've got 2 spots left to fill, but all of the names are quite familiar and they're all very consistent performers in international cricket. So, the depth is there, and I think that was one of the 2 things were to create a structure where, we encourage more teams to compete on the big stage, but competitively, and certainly take on board what Sanjog said earlier about teams not being competitive, and that's even though the margins in some of these matches have been substantial, the chances of an upset or on any given day for one team to beat another is probably stronger than it's been. The other one from our point of view is the hosting of events and the legacy of hosting, and I think that you can see the impact it has on the country. And the number of people asking about, well, not just asking for tickets for tomorrow's game, but certainly asking questions about the performance and, interest in the World Cup in the way that we were talking about earlier. And what we want to be able to do is take that opportunity to, turbocharge the exposure of the game in some of those territories that haven't hosted our events over a period of time. And, we are... we haven't been to the West Indies for 10 years. We're staging some games in the USA next year, which will be groundbreaking for international cricket there. And when we go to South Africa in 2027, we've got matches in Zimbabwe and we've got matches in Namibia as well. And the opportunity, even if it's a small number of games, just the memories and the impact it will have for cricket in those countries is going to be huge. But not, understanding where our fan base is and what their preferences are, and that's the juggle that we face. But in terms of the next 4 years, men's and women's events every year, senior men's and women's, and under-19 event each year as well. And the under-19 events are really important. I was talking to you yesterday about being able to watch Afghanistan over the years and watch the incredible pipeline of talent they have coming through the Under-19 World Cup and how those players are now representing Afghanistan in this World Cup and how important it is. So, the journey from Under-19s, pathway events, major global events and making them accessible to fans all over the world is really what our focus will be over the next 4 years. And we couldn't be happier working in a partnership with Disney Star because we've had a long partnership with them already. The game has gone from strength to strength during that time, and I think we're going to be really excited about what we're going to face through to 2027.
Thank you. So, Sanjog, if I may, 27 is going to be 20 years of a similar media organization's partnership with the ICC. Given your affinity of technology, 5G, generative AI, where do you see options, opportunities, either to do new things or stuff which could not be done as well in the past, but technology allows us? What's the sort of next generation of our daughter being 18, 17 by then? Where would that kind of storytelling take us to?
Wow, that's hard to say, and it says time's up.
Oh, ignore the time. Time's up. It's our show. It's fine. Don't worry about
Okay,
it. You make it, and that's fine. I think we have equal rights for 5 minutes. Jasper, is that okay?
I'll keep this short and not give away too many trade secrets. The ICC and Disney Star teams are sitting here. They wouldn't want me to talk about all that is being developed for the next World Cup. But what I will say is, in two parts. One, reacting to what Geoff said. I think the future of the game is about the game itself and the structure of the game. The ICC events, which really stand as the pinnacle of the game and the competition, and fans, right? I think next year is a huge year for the ICC and for the cricket ecosystem at large. It's a 20-team T20 World Cup, which means you will have so many more teams featuring heroes being thrown up. It's in a market that the ICC has never hosted an event in. I'm talking about the US. And it's really the start of a journey in the US market. There's also a women's event later in the year, which will happen. So for all practical purposes, the next year will really set the tone for the next 4 years of cricket in general. And I think all of us are aware of the challenges, but it's about how we see them as opportunities to really grow the game, bring new audiences in, activate new markets, get new teams into the mix that are genuinely competitive, that will set the ball rolling for what the future of cricket is really about. That's as far as the events. I think the game is also at an interesting inflection point. I mentioned briefly about the sport having 3 formats. What does that look like over the next 4 to 7 years? Multilaterals versus bilaterals. How relevant are bilaterals in a world dominated by multilateral franchise cricket and an ICC event every year? What does that mean for players? What does it mean for an ordinary cricketer who wants to have a career in sport and has to make choices between franchise cricket, which may be more lucrative, and playing for his or her country? And how do you balance those aspirations? And how does the ecosystem balance the aspirations of the athletes who are perhaps the most critical components of the entire ecosystem? So I think the future of the sport is really being shaped now. We've reached a point where some big decisions will have to be made, and perhaps the sport and its future will look very different from the way one could have imagined it 10 years back, or it has been in the past. So that's as far as the sport is concerned. And I think it's a big conversation that's happening in the ecosystem, and that needs to be had if we want our sport to go from strength to strength and continue on the growth trajectory that we want it to be on. As far as tech is concerned, I think what tech is doing to just about every sector is what it will do to sport, which is to challenge the very definition of the sport itself and what the sporting experience is about. Not just for fans, but also for athletes. Not just for administrators, but also for those who are on the fringes of the ecosystem. What AI can potentially do, what biometrics can potentially do to athletic performance. I think the sport as we know it, or as we have known it, is going to change more rapidly in the next 3 to 5 years than it has perhaps over the last 20. In terms of the structures, in terms of what tech will do to it, in terms of the events that have been planned, and in terms of who we consider a fan. And as stakeholders in the sport, it is contingent upon all of us to make sure that we are always looking to the future, always prioritizing growth, and always looking to find new markets, new audiences, new teams to continue to fuel the growth of this game.
Excellent. Sanjog, Geoff, thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen, I give you the fireside.